Two men wrongfully sent to death row, and you see it here. They are awarded $75 million in damages. So this is in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so a jury in North Carolina federal civil rights case has awarded $75 million to two black males, men, intellectually disabled half brothers who spent decades behind bars after being wrongfully convicted. This was in 1983, and it was for a rape and a murder of an 11-year-old girl. And so the eight-person jury on Friday decided that Henry McCollum and Leon Brown should receive $31 million each. And so this is in compensatory damages of $1 million for every year that was spent in prison. And so the News and Observer reported. So the jury also awarded $13 million in punitive damages. So that was additional. So the first jury to hear all the evidence, including the wrongful or wrongfully suppressed evidence, found Henry and Leon to be innocent, found them to have been demonstratively and excruciatingly wrong, and has done what the law can do to make it right at this late date. In Raleigh, North Carolina, an attorney, Elliot Abrams, said after the trial. So Abrams was part of the brothers' legal team, which issued a statement saying that the decades-long wait for recognition of a grave injustice inflicted on two by law enforcement was over. So it added, and I'm just going to say it isn't over because they have to live with that for the rest of their days. So whatever they experienced in those prisons and how they were treated, and being from what I've heard in the past, and I don't know if you've heard this, that when you're accused of killing children or raping kids, that you're treated a certain way in prison, and they have to move you to a certain place so that you won't be killed or you won't be raped yourself. And so you can be abused and who knows what else. And so these men were wrongfully accused, and they were spent many years, decades, it says, long decades in prison for crimes they didn't even commit. And so we're seeing a lot of this coming out now. And so I would say this is part of the reckoning as well, because of accusing black people of crimes that they hadn't commit, and they end up spending most of their natural life in prison, and before they're even found innocent, um, they've had their whole life stripped away almost, to the point to where when they do get out, they're really old, or they have to relearn how the world operates because they've been locked away for so long and taken out of society. So it's trauma along with it, I would say. So Abrams was part of the brothers' legal team, it says, which issued this statement saying decades-long wait for the recognition of the grave injustice inflicted on the two by law enforcement was over. And so it added that a jury has finally given Henry and Leon the ability to close this horrific chapter in their lives. So they look forward to a brighter future surrounded by friends, family, and their loved ones who've always been there for them. So McCollum and Brown have pursued the civil case that goes along with this against the law enforcement members since 2015, arguing that their civil rights were violated as well. Of course, we know that. had to be attached to this situation, unfortunately. During the interrogations, their civil rights were violated, and so that led to these convictions, these wrongful convictions. So the two were released from prison in 2014 after DNA evidence that pointed to a convicted murderer that exonerated them. And so they were teenagers when this happened, and they were accused of a crime which happened in Red Springs in Robeson County. So the attorneys for the men have said that they were scared teenagers who had the IQs, low IQs. They were really young at the time, and when they were questioned by police and coerced into confessing, does this sound pretty familiar? Like the situation where you had the, I believe it was 5 teenagers in New York, and they had a Netflix special called When They See Us, or I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, When They See Us. Um, I may not be pronouncing it correctly, but these young teenagers were accused of crimes of similar crime, like raping a woman in Central Park. And um, our former president had put out an $85,000 ad, I believe, to have the death penalty for these young men. And it turns up that these young men were not found actually the ones that committed the crime. They later, after the men had suffered a lot, going to prison, incarcerated, it took some of their natural life away from them, and so they have since now been exonerated. And so this sounds so familiar to what we've seen before, which is unfortunate. So it says Brown, who is the newspaper reporter, suffers from mental health conditions related to his time in prison and requires full-time care. So it says McCullen spent, jumping back here, so it says they both were convicted and sentenced to death, actually. So that's how it was. So let's go. It was saying here that they were questioned by police, they were coerced into confessing. So basically, they were sort of forced to confess to a crime that they didn't commit, to confess as if they did it. And so McCullen was, at the time he was 19 and Brown was 15, and they were convicted and sentenced to death. So they could have lost their lives. So McCullen, and they could have lost their lives in prison. So most of the 31 years in prison on death row, becoming North Carolina's longest serving death row inmate, Brown, who is now a newspaper reporter, suffers from mental health conditions related to the time in prison and requires full-time care, and had his sentence later changed to life in prison. And so on Friday, Robeson County Sheriff Office, one of the defendants, settled its part of the case for $9 million. So the town of Red Springs, originally named in the civil suit, settled at in the year of 2017 for a total of $1 million. So Friday's judgment came against the former SBI agent Leroy Allen and Kenneth Sneed, who were part of an original investigation. So Scott McLatchy, the lead defense attorney for SBI agents, attempted during his closing arguments to cast doubt on the brothers' innocence. So even still to this day, some people will still look at them, the ones that were involved in putting these men, wrongfully accusing them and putting them in prison for their natural lives, still are questioning their innocence. So the newspaper reported this despite the fact that they had received full pardons in innocence, and their DNA is not the same DNA that they actually found who was the real person that committed the crime. So I've got my freedom, McCullen said. There's still a lot of innocent people that are in prison today, and they don't deserve to be there. And so I'm not surprised. And so this is what we have been seeing a lot of this lately. And so a lot of these people that are incarcerated, they're either doing too much time or they shouldn't have been incarcerated to begin with. And this is but one of the many cases we've been seeing where people were wrongfully accused because they looked like somebody, or racism. Let's just be honest, racism plays a huge part in this. So this, I would say, is part of the reckoning, the racial reckoning that has been going on, and it isn't over with, and there's a lot of reckoning to be had. So having said that, I'm going to let this video go. Thank you for listening.